Welcome back to an obscure tour at the edge of the internet. I am your host, the Nameless Tour Guide, and today we will be discussing the Way of White before ascending the Watchtower and fighting the second boss of the game, the Taurus Demon. Now, you may notice that some of the numbers are slightly different. That is because I had some audio trouble with my first recording of this episode, so I have jumped into a different timeline. I'm going to be recording this again. Hopefully, next episode we will be jumping back into the previous timeline, and hopefully all the audio issues will not persist then. So if you notice anything odd and out of place, that is why that is happening. So on with the episode, which is about the Way of White and its many eras. So today, I want to do the discussion of the Way of White by going over all of the different eras of the Way of White, but not going into the detail of each era. We'll come across details of each era as we play the game, but right now I just want to get everyone on the same page about the different times that have occurred in the Way of White, as there were a few of them. And we'll do that by moving backwards in time, starting with Petrus of Thurl, who represents the current state of the Way of White, which is a covenant. So before I talk to Petrus, let's just quickly discuss what a covenant is. Here is a name of the affiliated covenant. I am currently a member of the Way of White because I started the game as a knight. If I'd started the game as a cleric, I would have also started the game in the covenant of the Way of White. And what a covenant is a connection which is something that can be revered and worshipped. It may seem that the easiest thing to think of it is that a covenant is a covenant with a god of some kind, but due to the nature of Lordran, with many of the gods being missing, it is actually very rarely a covenant with an actual god. It's actually a covenant with something appearing to be a god, or a thing taking the role of a god, but not a god itself. As we will discuss with the Way of White, that is important to the nature of the Way of White, especially as it exists now. So let's start by talking to Petrus of Thurl.
Hello there. I believe we are not acquainted. I am Petrus of Thurl. Have you business with us? If not, I'd prefer to keep a distance, if possible. Hello there. I realize that I have requested that we retain our distance, but I also want you to know that it is not meant in ill will. Here, take this, as a token of peace. No, go ahead. It's for you.
The copper coin is a symbol of one of the previous eras of the Way of White, so we'll be discussing that a little bit later.
Oh my. You again? Oh, I know. How about this? I have to await my companions here anyway. So what if I were to teach you some miracles? Would that please you? Very well. Then first, a covenant with the gods.
If I hadn't been a member of the Way of White already, I would have become a member of the Way of White just now.
Now let me share my miracles. Only their ultimate effectiveness will be determined by your efforts and your faith.
So, to understand where the Way of White is now, as being represented by Petrus, is to look at the item, the Thurl and Talisman. Now, here are all of the miracles of the gods that I could purchase from Petrus, and then I could equip those or attune those at the bonfire and then cast them using these catalysts. This here is a talisman. This is the common one that you would start the game with if you began the game as a cleric. Medium for casting miracles of the gods, standard talismans issued to common believers. Now let's look at this common talisman as associated in comparison to the Thurl and Talisman. Medium for casting miracles of the gods, this talisman is only granted to high-ranking Thurl and clerics, has high miracle adjust, which, thanks to divine protection, is not dependent upon faith. So there's a couple of things to unpack there quickly. The Thurl and Talisman, if we look here, is the first bit about this talisman is only granted to high-ranking Thurl and clerics. So this talisman of high-ranking Thurl and clerics can be purchased from Petrus for 5,000 souls. There's no initiation, there is no quest to go on. He will simply sell it to you for 5,000 souls. And now the second part. Has high miracle adjust, which, thanks to divine protection, is not dependent upon faith. If I was to equip a miracle that could do damage, or has some kind of strength to it, the miracle adjust will make that miracle stronger when I cast it if my faith becomes higher. As I level up, rather than putting my points into strength and dexterity, I could put them into faith, and my miracles will become stronger. But the Thurl and Talisman has an interesting ability, which is that I do not need much faith in which to get a very high miracle adjust. In fact, if I use the Thurl and Talisman, all I would need would be the minimum requirements of any of these miracles as faith, and you can see that there for force it's 12. All I would need would be that level of faith, and this talisman would allow me to cast it quite adequately, up until a faith of 22 or 25, thereabouts. The Thurl and Talisman will actually cast those miracles better than any other talisman in the game. But if you were devoted to the gods, if you had a lot of faith, the common talisman would actually do a better job once your faith became greater than the 25-ish number. The common talisman would become better. So, putting those two things together, we see the story of Thurl and this era of the Way of White. It is a talisman where it is a group of people who will happily sell to you symbols of their highest ranking Thurl and clerics for 5,000 souls, and fortunately for them, their miracles can be cast adequately with very low faith, because the people of Thurland have very little faith in the gods anymore. As I said before, most of the gods are missing at this point, or dead. No one knows what happened to them. And so the clerics are forced to get by with simply existing. And what do you do when you are a cleric at the end of the world and all the gods are missing? You shrug it off and carry on anyway. And that is the current state of the Way of White. And that is also shown in the design of the Way of White as an actual covenant. Covenants come in many different forms. Some of them allow you to level up by showing your loyalty to that covenant by presenting items to the vessel between you and the covenant, or it is simply acts that you do, and you can level up in those particular covenants and get stronger items or different rewards for your different covenants. But the Way of White has none of that. All the Way of White is capable of doing is when we enter into multiplayer games through summonings, which we'll get to in the next episode. When we enter into that interaction between the different worlds of Lordran that we talked about last episode, those who are in the Way of White are brought closer together. It is a brotherhood and nothing more. And this is why I was saying that it's not really a covenant with a god, because especially in the situation of the Way of White, there is no god. All it is a collection of people who have decided to form a community, and that is reflected in gameplay by when you go to participate in multiplayer gameplay. if you are part of the Way of White, you are more likely to be paired up with someone else of the Way of White. Another aspect of covenants are the miracle signs. So when I cast a miracle, if I'm in a particular covenant, such as the Way of White, which I am now, other players who are also in my covenant and playing through their version of Lordran in their world will see a small white circle on the ground. And if those players cast a miracle within the vicinity of that small white circle, they will have their miracle increased just slightly. So what's happened there is, when I show my faith in my part of the world by casting a miracle, those who are in my covenant will also get miracle adjusts in their world as well. And so we see with Petrus of Thurl here, he is making everybody that he meets a member of the Way of White and providing them with miracles so that he can then use their castings of miracles for his own benefit as he travels along through the world. So that is the current era of the Way of White.
Oh, hello. I will teach you. My companions are Milady and her young knights. She is young, but burdened by an undead mission. We are her defenses, to keep her from harm.
That is an allusion to the storyline of Rhea of Thurland, and we'll be discussing more of that when Rhea of Thurland comes to Filing Shrine.
An undead mission? Regrettably, I cannot share that with you. But you are my pupil. Perhaps if you show your faith.
And here we have Petrus of Thurland asking for a bribe for what he claims to be sacred information.
Very well. I can surely tell you, of all people, undead clerics are given a mission to seek kindling. Kindling is the art of feeding bonfires with humanity. Through kindling, we shall one day be granted magnificent powers.
So that we will talk about kindling in more detail in a later episode. But what's important there is that sacred information that I bribed Petrus for isn't particularly sacred or particularly associated with the Way of White. And this comes down to an idea that we'll find many, many times in Dark Souls, which is this idea that people are trying to actively deceive you. And that deception is everywhere. And that's important for the lore, because there are people who will say things to the chosen undead which are just not true. This deception can occur because the person has imperfect information, though the deception could just be that, much like Petrus is a character who is out to deceive. And so, moving from Petrus and the current state of the Way of White, we'll move to the previous era of the Way of White. Which was overseen by All Father Lloyd, and this here is his talisman. Talisman utilized by All Father Lloyd's cleric knights to hunt down the undead. In the outside world, the undead are accursed creatures, and Lloyd's cleric knights are widely praised for their undead hunts. Just a quick note on the outside world. That is something that the Way of White particularly have an association with. And that is the world that I was talking about before, where you can take a human form and then move between the different planes of Lordran. The Way of White interprets that as though there is something beyond Lordran that is the outside world, and the outside world is a place that many of the people of Way of White wish to get to, because Lordran is such a place of misery for them. They want to escape, and the Way of White is promising them that. And just as Petrus just said that kindling would grant them magnificent powers, it doesn't really give them anything more than what the act is of the burning of the kindling. But the gods once promised people, and Petrus continues that, the ability to escape Lordran and the promise of greater power. Though you could ask whether Petrus really believes that he will get magnificent power from gathering kindling, as he is somebody with no faith left, so he probably doesn't believe it himself. But he is continuing on the story, as happens quite a lot when people lose their faith. And so the Undead Hunts are represented by these 3 chests here in the previous era. We'll start with this chest here, the Homeward Bone, and this would allow me to teleport to the last bonfire that I rested at. Bonfires are fueled by bones of the undead. In rare cases, the strong urge of their previous owners to seek bonfires enchants their bones with a homeward instinct. So these homeward bones are the remains of the undead that were hunted by the cleric knights of All-Father Lloyd. Here we have the talisman and the Morningstar that they used in those hunts. And the Morningstar is the important one to pay attention here to. Here is the hammer with a sharp spike on its pummel, one of the more barbaric cleric weapons. So here we're seeing that not only is there a hunt going on, but the clerics are using barbaric weapons to do so, to perform those hunts. And here we have the cracked eye orbs. These can be used to invade another world. The Crack Eye Orb allows players to temporarily imitate the ability to invade another world, normally limited to the Dark Wraiths of Karth. We'll be discussing the Dark Wraiths and Karth later. But what is important there is that these undead hunts that are happening across worlds by the Cleric Knights of All-Father Lloyd are being done with stolen power from Karth and his Dark Wraiths, and they're only temporary. They are, it is a fleeting power, like they've found these orbs smashed on the ground somewhere and collected them, which, as a covenant which has an association with a god, seems rather odd. But that's because there are no gods left at that point, and they are no longer patronized, so they are having to get by stealing the cracked orbs from Karth and the Dark Wraiths. So putting that all together, the things to take away from all of that is how hopeless that situation seems. The followers of All-Father Lloyd are getting together to have undead hunts using temporary power stolen from the Dark Wraiths and Karth, in an attempt to keep the undead creatures at bay. And another very important aspect of that is the fact that the Morningstar is considered a very barbaric weapon. What is being shown there is the fact that order has broken down, that the chivalry of knights, which is a kind of a code of honor. In warfare, different units, different people of different ranks are given different weapons, and when certain people in an army are given more powerful weapons, such as a knight is given armor and shields and a sword, they also must adhere to a certain code of conduct, because their weapons are so much more powerful than everybody else's. They can do a lot of damage if they were to start acting in an unhinged fashion. That code of conduct vanishes under All-Father Lloyd, and instead what he's doing is giving the knights and knight clerics and He's giving people the trappings of knights and clerics, just ordinary people who are untrained, and sending them on these hunts. And because they are untrained in warfare, and they do not have the discipline of a trained warrior, they are resorting to barbaric acts. And that is because that's the only thing Allfather Lloyd has left. By that time, all he has is a rabble of people following him. So he puts them in armor, makes them cleric knights, merging the two ideas of clerics and knights together, and sending them off in an attempt to keep the undead at bay. So it's a time of desperation for Allfather Lloyd. Now, before that era, before Allfather Lloyd had his rabble in the Way of White, there was the last ordered era of the Way of White. In that era, Allfather Lloyd was still the Allfather of the Way of White. Allfather being the supreme male god is the term for that. He also had two other people who were gods. One was the Night King Randall. We do not have any artifacts of his at the moment, but he was a Night King from the Kingdom of Boldor. The other god was Old Man McGloif. Coin made of copper. Its face shows Old Man McGloif, god of medicine and drink. Now, if you remember back to the first episode, I noted quickly that on the Katarina face, it says that the Katarinans are known for their festivity and drink. Also, the face has a copper skin, and that's all coming together to represent to connect Old Man McGloif to Katarina. Old Man McGloif was the ruler or the chief knight. He's never given a title in the game, but he was the head knight of Katarina. Even coins of great value in the world of men have little value in Lordran, where the accepted currency is souls. Those who dream of returning to the outside world are fond of carrying these around. So once again, we see that even in this era of Allfather Lloyd, the Night King Randall, and Old Man McGloif, there is still a promise in the Way of White of escaping Lordran and moving on to a better plane of existence, the outside world. And in that era, the god that they are patronized at that point, and the god that they follow is Seif the Scaleless, hence the name the Way of White, the Way of the Pale Drake. And the Katarina Knights, the Boldor Knights, and the Baronite Knights, which we'll all be seeing soon, all were part of the Way of White at that point. So, moving to the previous era, before that happened, before that occurrence, the Way of White was in the care of Priscilla, the Dark Moon Goddess. Now, I haven't discussed Priscilla and her being the Dark Moon Goddess before. Those who played the game can probably see that quite clearly. It's just a good title to have for her, and so I'd like to just start using it. We'll get to how you can see that she's the Dark Moon Goddess later on and what it means to be the Dark Moon Goddess. The Way of White, before Allfather Lloyd and Seif the Scaleless and the rest of them ruled it, the Way of White was ruled by Priscilla and Seif the Scaleless. And in that era is where my character was created. So I started the game as a knight, and therefore I'm in the Way of White, because when the chosen undead died, he was in the Way of White, and he was buried with the shield, and this sword, and the armor set that you saw me take off immediately when I started the game. So let's put the armor set back on, and I'll demonstrate why I took this off immediately. You notice my movement has become very sluggish, and when I roll, I cannot roll as far, and my controller is vibrating in a very annoying fashion, and that is because of equipment load over here. As your equipment gets higher, your movement becomes slower, and you have to put more skills into into endurance to get more equipment load and be able to carry heavier things. This is actually a purposeful design for the opening knight class, what is supposed to be the noblest of classes in a game. I am a character who cannot carry the load of my own armor set. This is how I died, and I was an inadequate knight. Now, if we look at the item descriptions of this armor set: helm of a low rank knight. Despite the thin metal used, the grooved textures gives it added protection. So not only is it an ill-fitting armor set, it's a badly made one. It has made of thin metal, but fortunately there's grooved texture, so it's got some added protection, which is, I suppose, a good thing. But this is not the armor set of a noble knight. Now we can see this, and this is in the era of Priscilla and Sif ruling the Way of White, and we can see that by two things: the tower shield here being purple and silver, the banner colors of Priscilla. Each of the scaleless dragons have a different banner set of colors. Priscilla has purple and silver, the purple being the fact she's a scaleless dragon, and silver connecting her to the moon. Velka has purple and black, because she is a scaleless dragon and connects her to the dark. And Gwendolyn has purple and gold, connecting him to the sun. Gwendolyn also has silver and gold as well, depending upon the situation. As I said, Priscilla, Velka, and Manus have very neat symbols. The symbols of the other characters can get a little bit mixed, and you have to infer a little bit more, and that's kind of the case with Gwendolyn. And now, the other weapon that I'd like to discuss quickly is we have the broadsword here. And this is the symbol of Sif the Scaleless. Notice the full moon on the hilt and the blue. That is the full moon is a symbol of Sif the Scaleless, and his color is blue. And so, with the design of the knight class at the beginning of the game, we can see what has happened to the Way of White under the guidance of Priscilla and Sif the Scaleless, and that is they are a group of untrained soldiers with armor that does not fit them and should be immediately removed, though the weapons are quite good. And that is because Priscilla doesn't really need the Way of White when she inherits them. She has the Dark Moon Blades that serve her. Priscilla has a different group of knights with a different charge and a different responsibility, and she prefers them. And so she comes to ignore the Way of White, the Knights of the Way of White. She has two people who are in the Dark Moon Blades, who were once the Knights of Gwyn, that being Arturius and Kayran. And the other, and so she has very little need for the Knights of the Way of White. Now I can't get too close because I will get killed. But if you can see down in front of the Hydra over here, over there you see a dot in the distance as this Hydra tries to kill me. that is where you will acquire the Knight set eventually, once you can get down into that area safely. And it's positioned there to connect it to Priscilla, but also to connect it to the fact that the Knights start to serve Priscilla actively after the fall of Ulasil that we discussed last episode. And the Knight of the Way of White has attempted to vanquish this Hydra which is running amok in the Darkroot Basin, and has been quickly being dispatched because they are not very good at their job. The other thing to note there, that the Baronite Knights, the Knights of Boulder, and the Katarina Knights are all still around. But at that point, they were not members of the Way of White. They had a different purpose in the world. And we'll be discussing all of that later. So now we'll move to the next era of the Way of White. And that was when it became the domain of Havel the Rock. And this here is the last of Havel's men. They share the visual appearance of their great leader, but this is the last of them, and they were once in the Way of White. And as you can see by the colouring of their outfit, that is the reason why. That is, Havel's colours are white, hence the name, the Way of White. So if you look closely at the shield of this warrior, you'll notice some chains. They're very slightly detailed. They're on the inside and they're on the outside of that shield. So those chains can be found in the talisman that we picked up at the beginning of the episode, in Lloyd's talisman, because Lloyd took over the role of, and was the last person to have the role of leader of the Way of White. So the talisman is named after him in the game. But at some point it probably would have been called Sif's talisman and Priscilla's talisman, and probably Havel's talisman. Now what's happening here with Havel's talisman, this is a symbol from the very early era of the Way of White, and there is a chain wrapped around a silver orb, and that represents two things. The first being Havel's job to watch Sif the Scaleless, because Havel the Rock was very worried about Sif the Scaleless and his magic. But it would also represent something else. This here represents the binding of the soul. And that leads us to the origin of the Way of White. The Way of White was originally a covenant with Gwyn, hence the name the Way of White. And what happened with the Way of White and why it was founded is represented by this talisman. It is Gwyn's desire to chain the soul. So, in the opening cutscene, Velka talks about Gwyn trembling at the dark. But as we discussed in the last episode, the dark and the soul are actually a cycle. They're one in the same. The cycle, the soul representing the life force of all living things. And that is what Gwyn was most scared of, was the change and the force that would come with the unbridled soul. And this is the core of Gwyn's character and why the actions he takes cause so many problems in Lordran. So Gwyn is not a character of the fire. He doesn't revere the fire. Gwyn reveres the light. When he looks at his flame, he sees a light. When looks at his soul, he sees a light. When the Witch of Islith, in comparison, looks at her soul, she sees flame. So what Gwyn wants is the light, and he wishes that there was no dark, even though it is the nature of the fire is light and dark. It is the disparity. And the Witch of Islith sees fire because she embraces the disparity. She embraces the change. Another word for that would be chaos, hence the name, the Daughters of Chaos. But Gwyn doesn't. Gwyn worships the light and the order that light brings. When it's daytime, all of the monsters flee. When there's light, monsters flee. In the daylight, things are ordered and normal. And what Gwyn wants, is the light without the dark. And that is why he's such a tragic character, is because he knows he needs to link the first flame and sacrifice himself for the light. But he knows in doing so, he will create more dark. So his solution for that, his vain solution for that, is to create the Way of White. And he charges Havel the Rock with the task of keeping everybody in their place, becoming the Lord of Castes, or the God of Castes. And so castes are related to the concept of class in the Western world. It's the idea of which class you belong to in modern terms. That's like whether you belong to the political class or the business class or the poor class. In medieval times, there was kings and there were lords with kings and queens. There was gentry, there was serfs and peasants, there was trading classes, and that was, and in Lordran, there are many classes as well. There are knights, there are clerics, there are rulers, there are leaders of armies, there are gods, there are people who serve the gods, who are held in a higher esteem than others. And those are all aspects of caste, because not just your position in society, but your spiritual position in society as well, your devotion to the gods as well, is important when talking about caste specifically. And it was Havel the Rock's job to keep everything in its place, to chain the soul, and to make sure that everything stayed exactly as Gwyn wanted it to be in his order. And we see that in the opening scene, that when Gwyn is being introduced, we go through a very neat line of silver knights. And that is a representation of Gwyn's desire for order. But then when we see the Witch of Islith, some of her daughters are wandering in still as the thing starts, while others are already working, and there's chaos and there's fire going everywhere. The Daughters of Chaos and the Witch of Islith representing the more chaotic nature of the world. And that is and so that is why Gwyn created the Way of White and formed covenants with people at the end of the first age of dark. Because he knew that when he went to link the fire, there would be the chance that there would be another rebellion. And so, Havel the Rock did his best to keep back the chaos. But as you can tell by the history of the Way of White, that attempt was definitely in vain. And we'll be discussing Havel the Rock and all about him and his men and what happened to them later in another episode. And just talking quickly about the Lords, just before we go in to fight the Taurus Demon. Just do a very quick discussion just on the Lords. So we have Gwyn, who is not a is not the Lord of Fire. He's the Lord of Sunlight. He covets only the light. The Witch of Izalith covets the chaos that comes with the fire, the upheaval that comes with the fire. And while Gwyn wants to chain everything and put it in its place, and does so in a way that causes a lot of problems, the Witch of Izalith is also not faultless. Her pursuit, her appreciation of chaos is only in the good that it brings. It's only the only thing she concerns herself in is as it allows creatures to be more powerful, and all kinds of creatures become powerful under the Witch of Izalith. Men become powerful, gods become powerful, creatures become powerful, mushrooms become powerful. All of these things become powerful under the Witch of Izalith, but she cares little for the consequence of what happens to those left behind in her wake. And then we have Nito, who simply seeks service and devotion, and he is the god of death, and death is of course the great equalizer, and so to him in the end all things serve him eventually. And because of that, while that is may seem like a very cruel thing to do, and it is, he is seeking the servitude of dead creatures for eternity, no matter what they are. There's also a certain amount of egalitarianism to it all. In the end, Nito actually cares for all creatures, not just the powerful ones, not just the ones that fit his order, like Gwyn and the Witch of Izalith. He cares for all of them. Maybe it's vanity, maybe it's just because they will all serve him in the end, so he wants all of them to come to him in the catacombs. But whatever the motivation behind it, is that he is actually one of the more compassionate of the lords. And that comes through in the very few moments of emotion we get to see from Nito. And why he does what he does. And that's what I just want to also just clarify that. Is that why I like to just discuss those particular characters right now, is that while the story of The Way of White is fascinating as well and will help to explain a lot that's going on, understanding the motivation of Gwyn, the Witch of Izalith, and Nito also helps in seeing the lore in the game. And so, is that everything I need to discuss? Oh, one more thing, very, very quickly. If you started the game as a cleric, you are starting the game as a servant of Havel the Rock. That class is based upon how the clerics operated under Havel the Rock, and we will discuss that later when we find the armor set of the cleric. Now, in the last episode, I said that we would be seeing symbols of Manus and Volca everywhere. And so here we are, a symbol of Manus at the top of the watchtower. If you look at the body of this creature, you will see its connections to the creature we found in the old church in the woods. Though, we must say, this creature is looking much healthier than the other creature that we fought. And that is important because this is part of the duality that is everywhere in Dark Souls. The light and the dark. So, here we have Manus in his prime, bathed in light and a fit and healthy adversary, very much different from the one we met in the old church in the woods. So notice the feet, notice the protrusions on the back, notice the muscular chest definition. All of that connects this creature visually to this creature. Also notice the fact this creature has a head and has two legs rather than just the one. So there we have it, the second boss of Dark Souls. Now notice here, quickly, we don't get a soul from this demon, we get a homeward bone. I'll be discussing that later. Though, just to remind you that the homeward bone is the remains of the undead. So there we have it. That is the Taurus Demon, and that is a very important symbol of menace. Taurus being, I think, Latin football, might be Greek. I'm sure someone let me know in the comments. It's part of the zodiac. It means bull. And the bull is Menace's animal symbol. And by using the animal symbol of the bull, you will be able to see a lot more of Menace's influence in the world. And that is why he is the second boss of the game. That is what is being explained there about the importance of Menace to the story of Dark Souls, is the fact that the second creature represents Menace. The second monster represents Menace. I just want to pause up here on the watchtower, just to remind you of the Darkroot Basin below, and the sun at the top of the watchtower, and the duality there being expressed. Dark Souls spends a lot of time focusing on the Darkroot Basin aspect of existence, but the cycle of the souls and humanity can be a downward spiral, but it can also be an upward spiral. And actually, the two are linked. And it's important to just remember that as we go on our journey, is that even though the focus will be, because it is chosen to be the focus by our narrator Velka, of the evil of the world, there is also good that we all must remember is still there and still exists and is a part of the story of Dark Souls. But right now, let's return to the bonfire and call this episode. Let me just fight these Hollow Knights and get them out of our way. Fortunately, I'll be returning to the other timeline, hopefully with all of the sound working. So, I remember the first time that happened to me, I was so angry. So that was today's episode. We discussed the many eras of the Way of White, and let's go through that chronologically, because it was a very long section. Chronologically, the Way of White was created by Gwyn in the First Age of Dark, so that when he linked the flame, order would be kept in his absence. Havel the Rock was given the mantle of ruling the Way of White and leading it. Then Priscilla took over the Way of White, and at that point they became quite forgotten, quite a forgotten, inadequate group of knights, which are represented by the starting class of Dark Souls of the Night. We then discussed the era of Seath the Scaleless running the Way of White, along with Allfather Lloyd, the Night King Rendell, and Old Man McLoif, the Katarina Knight. And then we talked about Allfather Lloyd throwing armor and swords and shields on a rabble in an attempt to hold back the dead in the previous era of the Way of White, until we finally got to the era of Petrus of Thurl, where the clerics can be bribed for secret information and you can buy your position in their society. And with such low faith, they need their talismans to do all the work for them. We then went and fought the Taurus Demon and saw Menace in his prime, the top of the watchtower. And we learned that the symbol of Menace, the animal symbol of Menace, is the bull. So, I hope you all enjoyed this episode. We'll be returning to the normal timeline next episode. So, I'll hope to see you all then. Bye.